The snow had drifted against the iron gates of Eastleigh in a long white shoulder, and something in that drift was moving. Ambrose Rathmell, 9th Duke of Eastleigh, stopped where he stood with the lantern swinging from his fist and the wind tearing at his greatcoat, and told himself it was a hound, a fallen branch, a trick of the storm. Then the shape lifted a hand toward the bars, 3 fingers bare and blue, curling around cold iron, and he was running. He went down on his knees in the drift. The lantern light fell across a woman's face, half buried, her lashes white with frost, her lips the color of ash. A grey cloak stiff as board, a leather satchel strapped across her body, its buckle rhymed. She was perhaps 25. She was not, so far as he could tell in that first terrible instant, breathing. "Look at me," he said. His voice came out of him rough as gravel. He had not used it much in 3 years. "Look at me. Open your eyes." Her eyes opened, grey and focused, enormous in the lantern glow. Her mouth moved and made no sound. He did not wait to hear her. He shoved the lantern into the snow, hauled the gate wide against the packed drift with his shoulder, and gathered her up. She weighed nothing at all. That was the thing that frightened him, not the blue of her hands nor the frost in her hair, but the sheer nothing of her, as though the cold had already taken half of her away and was only waiting on the rest. Her head fell against his chest. He caught up the satchel too, because some instinct told him she would want it, and then he went up the long drive at a run, through snow to his knees, with the wind coming off the fells like a blade. "Hollis!" he shouted at the door. Hollis the fire, the small parlour, Hollis. The great door hauled inward. Hollis the butler, 70 if he was a day, stood with a candle and an expression that in 20 years of service had never once been surprised, and was surprised now. "Your Grace, blankets, hot bricks." "Wake Mrs. Pell." He was already crossing the hall, his boots leaving a black wet track across the marble, the woman's frozen cloak crackling against his coat. "And send Tom for the doctor." "Your Grace, the Marchburn Road is under 4 feet of snow. No horse will—" "Then send him on foot," said the Duke, and shouldered the parlour door open. There had been no fire in that room since the spring his wife died. The grate was swept and cold, the furniture stood under Holland sheets like a room full of ghosts, and he tore the sheets away one-handed and laid her on the couch and knelt there, chafing her hands between his own, and it was like holding 2 pieces of the gate-post. Mrs. Payne at a run with her grey plate down her back, took one look, and became in an instant the housekeeper she had been before grief made Eastleigh a house where nobody hurried. "Out, Your Grace, and let me get these wet things off her." Bricks, Hollis, from the kitchen range. Blankets from the airing press, the wool, not the linen. And then, more gently, to the woman on the couch, though the woman could not hear her. There now, my dear." He went out. He stood in the corridor with the door shut on him, he, the master of 11,000 acres, standing in his own passage with snow melting off his shoulders, and found that he could not stop looking at his hands. They had held something living. It had been a long time. When they let him back in, she lay wrapped to the chin, and her breath came in small, shallow flutters that he had to watch very closely to see at all. "She's alive," Mrs. Pell said quietly, "but it will be a neang till morning. The cold's got into her deep. We must bring her round slow, or her heart will not bear it." "Then we bring her round slow," he said, and sat down in the chair by the couch, and did not move from it. The doctor never came. Tom Ferrer got a mile down the Marchburn Road and turned back with the snow to his chest. So the house nursed her itself, all that black howling night, Mrs. Pell with the warmed bricks in flannel, Hollis carrying coal, and the Duke of Eastleigh sitting with his elbows on his knees, watching a stranger breathe. Toward 2 in the morning she began to shiver, great racking shudders that shook the whole couch. "That's good," said Mrs. Pell, with tears standing in her eyes. "That's her body remembering how. It's when they don't shiver that you lose them." At 4 she spoke. He had been half asleep, his chin on his chest, and her voice brought him up out of it like a hand on his shoulder. "The satchel," she said, cracked, faint, perfectly clear. "Please, don't let it get wet." He looked at the leather bag steaming gently on the hearthstone, where he had set it himself. "It's dry," he said. "It's here." Her eyes found him. She looked at him a long moment, as though placing him among a great many other faces, and then she said, "You were at the gates," and closed her eyes, and slept properly, slept, deep and warm, her hands loose. He sat there until the window went grey. Her name was Verity Marsh, and she was a nurse. She told them so at noon of the next day, propped on pillows with a bowl of beef tea in her hands. Her voice was still ruined, but her wits were sharp as a pin. She had trained under a surgeon in Newcastle, and after that at a fever house in Leeds, and she had come south by the coach as far as Marchburn, and from Marchburn she had walked. The Duke repeated. He was standing by the window with his arms folded. He had told himself twice that morning that a courteous man would look in on her once and leave her to the women, and he had come back 3 times. Marchburn is 11 miles, 9 by the field path. She turned the bowl in her hands. There is fever at Nettleford, your grace, the village at the foot of your hill. 3 houses have it, and there is no doctor nearer than Marchburn, and the Marchburn doctor will not come out for cottagers who cannot pay. So the parish sent to Leeds, and Leeds sent me. She said it plainly, without pride and without complaint, the way a man might state the price of corn. I walked because there was no cart to be had after the snow began, and when you reached Nettleford. Something moved behind her face and was put away again. They would not have me, she said. Would not. I came in the dark with a satchel of physic on my back and no letter from any gentleman they knew, and I told them there was fever in the village, and I said the word fever. She looked up at him with those grey eyes. You have never seen a door shut so fast in your life. 3 of them. The 4th threw the bolt before I reached the step. They were afraid, your grace, and afraid people do not open doors. They shouted at me to go up to the Manor, that the Manor could turn me away as well as they could. Her mouth curved, faintly exhausted. So I went up to the Manor. The fire cracked, snow ticked at the glass, and found the gates shut, said the Duke. And found the gates shut, she agreed. And, well, there is a lamp burning somewhere behind those windows, and a lamp means a soul, and a soul may hear me if I can only make a noise. A small pause. I do not remember making any noise. You did not. He heard how flat his own voice was, and could not make it otherwise. You put your hand on the bars, that is all. Another quarter of an hour and the snow would have covered you, and no one in this house would have known until the thaw. Yes, she said. That had occurred to me. She said it so calmly that something in him turned over. He had not been afraid of anything for 3 years. That was the truth of the man he had become, and he had known it and been content with it, since Cecily died. Since the small stone in the chapel with 2 dates carved 4 days apart, and the second stone beside it with only 1. The Duke of Eastleigh had shut his gates and let the hedges grow, and gone through his days with the perfect steadiness of a man who no longer had anything left that could be taken. Grief had not broken him. It had simply frozen him the way a lake freezes, still doing everything a lake does, but silently and to no purpose, and cold all the way down. And last night he had knelt in a snowdrift and been afraid. You are welcome here until the road's clear, he said abruptly, and went out and shut the door. 3 days the storm blew itself out, and Verity Marsh mended, faster than Mrs. Pell thought decent. On the 3rd day she was out of the parlour and into the great cold hall in a borrowed shawl, walking slowly along the wall with her hand on the panelling. And when the Duke came in from the stables he found her at the foot of the staircase, looking up at it. You should be lying down, he said. A person who lies down too long forgets how to stand. She did not turn. Your Grace, why is your house asleep? He stopped in the middle of the hall. There are dust sheets on every stick of furniture on this floor. She said it not as an accusation but as an observation, the way she might have said a wound was inflamed. There is 1 fire lit in a house with 40 grates. Your butler carries coal because there is no footman to carry it, and he is 70 and his knees are gone, and he will not say so. Your housekeeper has not had a maid under her hand since Michaelmas. There is a great house here and money in it, and it is being kept like a mausoleum. Why? Nobody had spoken to him so since his wife died. Nobody had dared. Because the woman who kept it is dead, he said. He watched her take that in. He watched her not flinch from it, and not soften her eyes and murmur, and not do any of the 20 small cowardly things people did when they came too near his grief. She simply stood with her hand on the newel post and looked at him with the plainest, gravest attention, as if he had told her where the pain was. Yes, she said. I did not know. There is no reason you should, and the house has been in mourning ever since, she said. 3 years. 3 years. And what, said Verity Marsh, is that doing for her? The one fire in the hall grate sank a little, and no one put on coal, because there was no one to do it. Nothing, said the Duke of Eastleigh after a long time. No, she agreed gently. I did not think it was. She let go of the newel post, she swayed and caught herself and lifted her chin as though daring him to notice. Where is your old man? The one who coughs. I heard him in the night, 2 floors up, and it is not a cough I like the sound of. Barnaby, he said, bewildered. Barnaby Gill. He was my father's coachman. He has been dying since the autumn, and there is nothing to be done, and he is 81. Then he is 81 and dying, she said, and that is all the more reason he should not do it alone in a cold room at the top of a house. Will you take me up? He took her up. He carried the chair himself, up 4 flights to the attic passage, because she would not have gone slowly, and he would not have her fall. Barnaby Gill lay in a narrow bed under a low ceiling, a small yellow man with a white beard, and the room smelled of dust and cold ashes, and the Duke stood in the doorway of it and felt shame come up in him like water. Verity did not stand in the doorway. She crossed the room, opened the window 2 inches and said, "That's better already. He'll take a chill," Mrs. Pell said from the passage. "He is drowning in his own chest, Mrs. Pell, and stale air is no friend to him." She was already unbuckling the satchel. She knelt by the bed and put her fingers to the old man's wrist and bent her head and counted, and the Duke, watching, saw her face change into something he had no name for. Absolute stillness, absolute attention, as though nothing in the world existed but that thready pulse. "Mr. Gill, Barnaby." "Can you hear me?" The white beard moved. "Aye. You have a deal of fluid on the chest, and lying flat frightens you, so you have been sitting up all night wearing yourself out." Her voice was very level. "We shall prop you high on pillows so that you may sleep sitting, and you shall have steam for the cough, and warm broth every 2 hours whether you want it or not, and someone in that chair beside you day and night." "There's none to spare," the old man whispered. "House is empty." "I told 'em not to trouble." "There is one to spare," said the Duke of Eastleigh, and came into the room. He sat with Barnaby Gill that night and the night after. He had not sat up with a dying man since his wife's confinement, and the first hour was the worst he had known in 3 years, and he did not leave. Verity showed him how to raise the pillows, how to hold the cup, how to talk of nothing in a low voice, because a frightened man dying in the dark needs a voice more than he needs physic. She came every 2 hours, silent as a cat, sleeves turned back. Once, near dawn, she fell asleep sitting on the floor of the doorway with her head against the frame, and the Duke took the blanket from his own knees and laid it over her, and sat back down and did not sleep at all. Barnaby Gill did not get better. Nobody had promised that he would. But he was warm and propped high, and he could breathe, and on the 4th night he was well enough to talk, and he talked for 2 hours about the Duke's father and a runaway pair of greys and a hedge near Cransley. He had jumped in a curricle with 2 ladies screaming, and the Duke laughed aloud. A short, rusty, astonished sound that brought Mrs. Pell to the bottom of the attic stairs to listen with her hand over her mouth. He died on the 6th morning, holding Verity's hand and the Duke's. "Master Ambrose," he said, quite clearly, using a name nobody'd used in 30 years. And then, the gates went oiling, and then he was gone. Verity closed his eyes and stood a moment with her head bent. Then she folded his hands and drew the sheet and turned, her own eyes wet and her voice perfectly steady. "He was not alone," she said. "He was not afraid, and there is not one thing more that any soul on this earth could have done for him. Hold to that, your grace. It is a great deal." The Duke of Eastleigh discovered that he could not speak. She put her hand on his sleeve, only a moment, only the lightest pressure of 4 fingers on black wool, and went out to tell the house. He stood a long while in that little cold room, looking at the 2 inches of open window and the grey sky beyond, and at the place on his sleeve where her hand had been, and understood, with the calm of a man reading a letter that tells him his life is ending or beginning, that he was in a great deal of trouble. The house woke after that, so quietly that he could never say afterwards which day it began. Fires in the library and the morning room, the holland sheets off, and under them walnut and rose silk and no ghosts at all. Girls came up from Nettleford wanting work, and a boy for the coals, and Hollis stopped carrying scuttles and stood in the hall in his black coat looking like a butler again, and grew visibly younger. Mrs. Pell had the presses out and the chimneys swept. Mrs. Pell had, in point of fact, been waiting 3 years for somebody to give her leave, and Verity had merely said at breakfast in a mild voice, "Mrs. Pell, is there truly no jam in this house?" And something in the housekeeper came loose like a jammed lock, and the Duke let it happen. He told himself he was letting it happen out of indifference and knew it for a lie, and went on telling it to himself while he stood in the library door at 4 in the afternoon, watching the winter light fall through clean glass onto a rug he had forgotten he owned. While Verity Marsh knelt at the hearth with a poker, arguing with the new boy about the proper construction of a fire. "He is your servant," the Duke said. "You are not required to teach him his trade on your knees. He is 12, and his father is dead, and he has never laid a fire in a grate this size in his life, and if I do not teach him, he will be dismissed for being bad at it." She sat back on her heels and blew a strand of hair from her eyes. "Also, Your Grace, you are standing in a doorway again. You do it a great deal. You come to the edge of a room and you stop." He said nothing. "Why do you stop?" "Because for 3 years every room in this house had something of my wife in it," he said, "and it was easier to look at it from the door." Verity set the poker down. "Tell me about her," she said. Nobody had asked him that. Not once. The county had black-edged letters and turned their faces away when they met him in Marchburn. His own mother had written that the best thing was not to dwell. And here was a nurse in a borrowed grey gown on his hearthrug saying, "Tell me about her," as though Cicely were a thing that could still be spoken of, as though she had been a woman and not merely a wound. So he told her. He sat down on the arm of a chair. He did not come into the room. Not properly, not yet, and told her about Cecily Rathmell, who had laughed too loudly and hunted too fast and filled the house at Christmas with 40 people and made him dance when he did not wish to dance, and about the child, who had lived 4 days and was buried beside his mother in the chapel. The fire burned low while he talked, and Verity did not once interrupt him. She would have hated this, he said at last. Sheets. Hollis with the coal. She would have. He stopped. "She would have opened the windows," said Verity. "Yes. Then it was not her house that died, Your Grace. It was you. And you are not dead, whatever you may have arranged to look like." She rose from the hearth and dusted her hands and stood there in the firelight with those grey level eyes on him, and something in his chest turned over so violently that he had to look away. "The roads are open," she said. "The carrier came through this morning." He understood after a moment what the words meant. "Then you will be going down to Nettleford. There is fever in 3 houses and no one to nurse it, and I have been eating your bread a fortnight. Yes, they shut the door in your face. They were afraid." She gathered up her satchel. "They will shut again, most likely, and I shall stand upon the step and be very tedious until they open it, because that is the work." A small, tired, wonderful smile. "It is not a heroic trade, Your Grace. It is mostly standing on steps." The Duke of Eastleigh stood up. "They will not shut the door," he said, "if the door is opened for you." She went down the hill next morning, and he went with her. He had not been into Nettleford in 3 years. He rode in at the top of the street with Verity on the grey mare beside him, and the village came out to look and stood, and did not know what to do with its hands. He dismounted at the first cottage and knocked, and when it did not open he knocked again and said, in the voice his grandfather had used on the bench at Marchburn Assizes, "It is Eastleigh. Open the door." It opened. "This is Miss Marsh," said the Duke. "She is a nurse. She is under my protection. She is at your service, and any house in this village that shuts its door against her shuts it against me." He looked down the street at all the faces, aware, distantly, of how long it had been since he had looked at any of them. "There is fever here, and it will worsen before it mends. Miss Marsh will tell you what is to be done, and you will do it. Eastleigh will pay for whatever she asks, coals, blankets, beef. And no man is to be troubled for rent while there is sickness in his house. That is all." Nobody cheered. It was not that kind of village, and he was not that kind of Duke. But old Ferrer stood back from his own doorway with the tears running into his beard and said, "She can come in, your grace. She can come in and welcome." And Verity Marsh went past him into the dark with her satchel on her shoulder, as though she had been going into that house every day of her life. She was in Nettleford 11 days, and the Duke was there for 9 of them, carrying a mattress down a lane on his own back, holding a lantern in a doorway at 3 in the morning while she worked. The fever went through 11 houses. It took 2, an old woman who had been failing since Candlemas, and a young man who went out on the 3rd day to help move a sick neighbour and got wet through and never came back from it. And it left 9 houses standing, and every one of the 9 said afterwards the same thing, in that flat North Country way that means more than it says. The nurse never went to bed, nor did the Duke. He watched her hands, which were never still and never hurried. He watched her kneel at 4 in the morning by straw pallet, grey-faced with exhaustion, and say to a terrified labourer's wife, in a voice like warm water, "Now then. He is very ill, and he may die, and I will not lie to you about that. But he is not dying tonight, and you are going to lie down in the next room for 2 hours, and I am going to sit with him, and if he stirs I shall wake you. Go on, my love. Go and lie down." And on the 11th day, when the last fire was out and the last window open, and the village was simply a village again, he came to fetch her home and found her sitting on the low wall by the pump with her satchel at her feet and her face lifted to a thin white sun. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. And then Verity Marsh put her hands over her face and wept silently and terribly, with her shoulders shaking, and the Duke of Eastleigh sat down on the wall beside her and did not touch her, because she had not asked to be touched, and stayed there in the cold until she was finished. She stayed at Eastleigh through February, because there was no coach to Leeds until the roads hardened, and because the Duke did not ask her to go and Verity Marsh did not offer. They fell into hours together the way water finds a channel. She had the run of the library and used it. He took to working at the long table by the window instead of in his study, with Verity in the window seat and her feet tucked under her, and neither of them said a word about it. "And you have never wished," he asked her one evening, not lifting his eyes from the rent book, "for a house of your own?" "Wishing is a poor economy," said Verity. "One may wish oneself into a great deal of unhappiness in an afternoon." He set down his pen. "That is not an answer." "No," she agreed, "it is not." Outside the tall window the snow lay blue in the dusk, and the iron gates at the foot of the drive stood open. They had stood open since the night of the storm. He had given the order. The second storm came at the end of the month, out of the north at 4 in the afternoon, with no more warning than a change in the light. By 6 the fells were gone, and the wind was screaming in the chimneys. At 6:30 Tom fare up from the village on a stumbling pony. The Hursts were still at the shepherd's hut above Cransley Beck with their flock, and the beck was rising with the melt beneath the snow, and the hut stood on the wrong side of it. The Duke was already reaching for his coat. Verity followed him into the hall. How far? 3 miles. 2 of them uphill. He was pulling on his gloves. Hollis had the lantern, and the stable lads were bringing rope. One of them is old Jem Hurst, who cannot walk half a mile on a good day. If they wait for morning, the beck will have taken the hut. Then you will want blankets carried, and a hand with the horses, and someone who knows what cold does to a body," she said, and reached for a cloak. She stopped. "You will not come," said Duke. "Not this time. Your Grace." Verity. It was the first time he had used her name. He heard it land between them like a dropped coin. "6 weeks ago you were dying in a snowdrift at my gates. You have been into 11 fever houses since, and you have not slept 2 nights together. And if you go up that fell tonight, you will not come down it. You have told 100 people what they must do for their own good and made them do it. Now hear it yourself. Stay. Have the beds warmed and the fires built, because they will come in half frozen, and half of what saves them will happen in this hall and not on that hill." For a moment she stood with her cloak half on and her chin up, and he watched her want to fight him and weigh it and choose. "Very well," she said. "The east bedchambers, hot bricks and no hot baths. Bring them round slow, or their hearts will not bear it. And your Grace." She came a step nearer, reached up, and did up the topmost button of his great coat, a small, ordinary, unbearable act, and left her hand a moment against the wall. "You come down that hill too. Do you hear me? All 5 of you." Yes, said the Duke of Eastleigh, whose heart was hammering like a boy's. They got the Hursts out at midnight, because 11 men of Nettleford came up the fell behind their Duke with lanterns and rope, and because the beck had not quite taken the footbridge, and because Ambrose Rathmell went into the water to his chest to hold the end of a rope while old Jem was carried across on the back of his own son. He was in the beck a quarter of an hour. It was February, and the water came straight off the snow. And afterwards he could not remember climbing out of it at all, only the 3 miles down with his sodden coat freezing to a shell upon him, and the strange, reasonable, seductive thought that it would be pleasant to sit down a moment in the snow. He did not sit down. He went on thinking, with the last clear part of his mind, of a hand doing up a button. There was light in the hall. There were fires in the east bed chambers and hot bricks in 8 beds, and there was Verity Marsh in the doorway with the lamplight behind her. The last thing the Duke of Eastleigh knew of that night was the look on her face as she saw him, and the sound of his own given name in her mouth, once, unguarded, the way it is said to a man who is loved, before the floor of his own hall came up and took him. He was ill 19 days. It began as a chill and turned in 3 into the fever, the same that had gone through Nettleford, and it found him soaked and worn out and very nearly finished him. The doctor came out from Marchburn now. The roads were open, and dukes are always worth the journey, and said the things doctors say, and bled him, and Verity Marsh stood at the foot of the bed with hands folded and observed, in a voice of glacial politeness, that if he opened that vein a second time she would put him out of the house herself. He did not open it again. She never left the room. 19 days. She slept in the chair, ate standing, sponged him cool when he burned and heaped him with blankets when he shook, got water and broth him a spoon at a time, hour upon hour, while the house held its breath below. Mrs. Pell wept in the still room. Hollis came twice a day to the chamber door and asked, and was told, and went away with his old back very straight. And Nettleford, which in 3 years had scarcely seen its Duke's face, sent a boy up the hill every morning to stand in the kitchen yard until somebody came out and told him how his Grace did, and then sent him back down to tell the village. The Duke knew nothing of it. He was a long way off, in a country of heat and cold and terrible corridors, and in all of it there were only 2 fixed things, a cool hand on his forehead and a voice. The voice never wept and never faltered. It spoke to him of nothing at all, the state of the drive, the boy who had at last learned to lay a fire, the crocuses coming up green in the chapel grass, and once, at the worst of it, when the fever had him so hard that he could not tell the ceiling from the floor, the voice broke its own rule. "You cannot," it said close and fierce. "Do you hear me, Ambrose? You picked me up out of the snow. You do not get to leave. It is not permitted. I will not have it." He came back on the 20th morning, into grey light and the smell of wood smoke weak as water. And Verity Marsh was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head fallen sideways, her hand still lying open on the coverlet an inch from his own, as though she had been holding on, and had let go only when it was safe. He looked at her a long time. Then he moved his hand, which cost him everything he had, and closed it around hers. She woke at once, the way nurses do. "Oh," she said. And the Duke of Eastleigh, who had a great many things to say and no strength to say them with, held on to her hand and said the only one that mattered. "Don't go." She stayed. He mended through March, and every day she made him do a little more, sit up, then stand, then walk the gallery on her arm, then the terrace, then the drive. And every day the county came a little further out of its hedges to look, for word had gone about that the Duke of Eastleigh was up and walking, and that he did it leaning on the arm of a nurse in a grey gown, and that he looked down at her when she spoke. His mother came from Bath in the first week of April. She sat in the drawing-room in black bombazine with her gloves in her lap, and said the thing she had come 300 miles to say, that the whole county was talking, that a hospital nurse without family or fortune, however deserving, and nobody denied she was deserving, was not a woman a duke could marry, and that she had come, in short, to save him from a piece of grateful folly. Her son heard her out to the end, standing at the window with his hands behind his back, looking down the drive at the open gates. 3 years ago, he said, I buried my wife and my son in the chapel behind this house, and I shut those gates, and this family let me. You wrote that the best thing was not to dwell. The county wrote, and I did not answer, and the county stopped writing. Nobody came up this drive for 3 years, madam. Nobody, he turned round, except one woman on foot, in a blizzard, with a bag of physic on her back, who had been turned from every door in Nettleford and came up the hill anyway, because there was a lamp in a window, and a lamp meant a soul. She had walked 9 miles to nurse people she had never met. She buried Barnaby Gill holding his hand. She went into 11 fever houses. She kept me alive 19 days while you were in Bath. He said it without heat, which made it worse. Grateful folly. Madam, I am not marrying Verity Marsh because she saved my life. I am marrying her because in the whole of my life, she is the only person who ever looked straight at what was wrong with me and did not turn her face away. The Dowager Duchess sat very still. You have asked her, then? No, said her son. I have been afraid to. He asked her that evening. He found her where he knew she would be, at the foot of the drive by the iron gates, in the blue dusk, with the last of the snow in dirty ribbons under the hedge and the first green pushing through it. She heard him and turned, and he watched her take in his face and go very still. They will say every unkind thing that can be said, he told her. They will say you schemed for it. They will say it in this county and in London, and some of them will say it to your face. Yes, said Verity Marsh. They will. And the Duke of this place is a difficult, silent, badly mended man of 38 who does not dance and who stands in doorways. His voice was not steady, and he let it not be steady. You would have the house, the keys, the county, the whole weight of it. And you would have the fever house at Nettleford, and any other you wanted, and money to build it with, and nobody living, not my mother, not the bishop, not one soul, to tell you that a duchess may not kneel by a straw pallet at 4 in the morning. I would not take that from you. It is the best thing in you, and it is half of why I love you. The wind came up the drive and stirred the bare hedge. Stay, said the Duke of Eastleigh, not as a servant of this house, not as a nurse in it. Stay as my wife, and Verity Marsh, who had walked 9 miles through a blizzard to nurse strangers, who had not wept when they turned her away, who had wept only when the last fire was out, stood at the gates where he had found her freezing, and put her hands over her face, and laughed and cried and said, You great fool. I have been standing at these gates every evening for a month, working out how to tell you. He took her hands down from her face and held them, those chapped, capable hands, the 2 pieces of gaiter post he had chaffed between his own on the worst night of his life, and raised them, one and then the other, and kissed them, and then he kissed her there, in the falling dark, with the gates standing open behind them. They were married in the chapel at Eastleigh at the end of May, and it was not a quiet wedding, because he would not have it quiet. The gates stood wide and the drive was lined, and the whole county came, the great houses in their carriages, and behind them on foot and in their Sunday coats 400 tenants and all of Nettleford. The Hursts came every one. Old Jem walked. The village women had made her gown between them, since she would not hear of London, and it was white muslin and quite plain, and Mrs. Powyd so hard that Hollis gave up his own handkerchief and then stood there with nothing, blinking furiously at the roof, and afterwards, coming out of the chapel door into the sun, the Duke of Eastleigh stopped on the step with his wife's hand upon his arm, stopped before the whole county, the earls and the parsons and the disapproving aunts from Bath, and the shepherds at the back with their hats in their hands, and looked down at her as he had looked at nothing else in 3 years, and did not care in the least who saw it. Old Ferrer at the back said what the village was thinking, and said it too loudly, the way deaf men do. He found her at the gates, he said, half dead in the snow, she was. And she went and saved the lot of us. The Duchess of Eastleigh heard it, and laughed, and turned her face up into the sun. And her husband, who had gone out into a blizzard 3 winters after he had stopped caring whether he lived, and had come back carrying his whole life in his arms without knowing it, closed his hand over hers, and led her down the steps into the light.